Somewhere around 6 weeks postpartum, though for some women it is 6 days and for others it is 6 months, something happens that nobody warned you about. You are feeding the baby. Or bathing the baby. Or standing at the kitchen sink at 2 a.m. making up a bottle in the dark. And a thought comes. Quietly at first. Then louder. Who am I now? Not in a dramatic way necessarily. Not a crisis, not a breakdown, though for some women it becomes both of those things. Just a question. A strange, disorienting, surprisingly painful question that seems to have appeared from nowhere. Because you are a mother now. You know that. You feel that. The love is real and it is enormous and it is nothing like anything you were prepared for. But somewhere underneath the love, something else is happening. Something that has no name in the language anyone gave you before you had this baby. Something that the books did not cover and the antenatal classes did not mention and the well-meaning people who asked if you were enjoying every moment never thought to explain. You do not feel like yourself anymore. Not in the way that sleep deprivation explains. Not in the way that a difficult birth or a hard recovery explains. Something deeper than that. Something that feels like the person you were before, the one with the career and the friendships and the opinions about things that had nothing to do with feeding schedules, has become strangely distant. Like a photograph of someone you used to know. And the worst part, the part that most mothers carry privately for months or years without ever saying it out loud, is the guilt that comes with noticing it. Because you love your baby. You would do anything for your baby. And so what kind of mother notices that something of herself has been lost in the process of creating this new life? What kind of mother grieves herself? I need you to hear something today that will change how you understand everything that has happened to you since you became a mother. What you experienced, what you are possibly still experiencing, has a name. It is backed by decades of research. It is as neurologically significant as puberty. And the reason nobody warned you about it is not because it is rare or unusual or a sign that something went wrong. It is because we have catastrophically, collectively, failed to talk about one of the most profound human transformations that exists. It is called matrescence. And by the time this video is finished, you will understand yourself, the version of you that exists now, after the baby, in a way you simply have not been able to before. The word matrescence was first coined in 1973 by a medical anthropologist named Dana Raphael. She created it deliberately as a parallel to adolescence, because she believed, based on her research across multiple cultures, that the transition into motherhood was as psychologically and biologically significant as the transition from childhood into adulthood. Think about what we do for adolescence. We name it. We study it. We build entire educational frameworks around supporting young people through it. We tell teenagers, your body is changing, your brain is changing, your sense of identity is shifting, your emotions will feel overwhelming, this is normal, this is expected, this will resolve. We give adolescents a map. We give mothers nothing. Matrescence describes the complete biological, psychological, neurological, and social transformation a woman undergoes when she becomes a mother. And the word complete is doing important work in that sentence. Because this is not a partial transformation. It is not a lifestyle adjustment or a role addition or a new chapter alongside the existing ones. It is a reorganization of the self at the most fundamental level. And the research, the neuroscience in particular, shows just how literal that reorganization is. A landmark study published in Nature Neuroscience in 2016, led by researcher Elsline Hochsandik and conducted at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, used MRI brain imaging to examine the brains of first-time mothers before and after pregnancy. What they found was extraordinary and at the time genuinely shocking to the scientific community. Pregnancy and early motherhood produce significant, measurable, long-lasting structural changes in the human brain. Gray matter, the neural tissue responsible for processing information, managing emotions, and navigating complex social situations, was reduced in specific regions. Not randomly. Selectively. In areas associated with social cognition, self-referential thought and the processing of other people's emotions and intentions. And those changes were not temporary. 2 years after giving birth, the structural differences were still visible and measurable in the brains of the mothers studied. The researchers concluded something that every mother who has ever felt changed by motherhood already knew in her body: pregnancy does not just change your life. It changes your brain. Permanently. Measurably. Structurally. You are not the same person you were before you had your baby. Not metaphorically. Neurologically. And nobody told you that was going to happen. The psychological experience of matrescence has been described by researchers as an identity earthquake. And that phrase, I think, is the most accurate description I have ever encountered for what so many mothers feel but struggle to name. An earthquake does not destroy a landscape randomly. It shifts the foundations. What was solid becomes uncertain. What was in one place is now in another. The landscape is recognizably the same hills, the same trees, the same sky, but everything has moved. And you have to learn where things are all over again. This is what happens to a woman's sense of self in early motherhood. The psychologist Dan McAdams, whose work on narrative identity has reshaped how we understand the self, describes identity as the story we tell about ourselves, the ongoing, continuously edited narrative of who we are, where we came from, and where we are going. It is not fixed. It evolves. But it evolves gradually, incrementally, in ways we can usually absorb and integrate. Motherhood does not give you that gradualism. It arrives, and with it, an entirely new chapter that has not been written yet, attached to a self that has not yet worked out who it is in this new context. You are a person with a particular relationship to your work, your friendships, your body, your time, your sense of purpose and competence and autonomy. And then, overnight, or over 9 months and then overnight, all of those relationships changed simultaneously. Your relationship to your body changed. Your relationship to your time changed beyond recognition. Your relationship to your friendships changed. Your relationship to your work changed. Your relationship to your own needs changed. And all of this happened while you were also navigating the most physically demanding, emotionally overwhelming, sleep-deprived period of your adult life. Researcher Amy Buckley at University College Dublin, whose work focuses specifically on maternal identity, found that the women who struggled most in early motherhood were not the ones with the most difficult babies or the least support, though both of those factors mattered. The women who struggled most were the ones who had the strongest, most developed pre-motherhood identities and who had received no preparation for the fact that those identities would be disrupted. The more clearly you knew who you were before, the more disorienting it is to feel like you do not recognize that person anymore. This is not a pathology. This is not depression, though it can exist alongside depression. This is the entirely expected, entirely normal, entirely unacknowledged process of an identity reorganizing itself around a seismic new reality. The problem is not that it is happening. The problem is that nobody told you it was coming. And so instead of understanding it as a transformation, as something that is happening to you that has a name and a shape and an eventual resolution, you have been interpreting it as evidence that something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You are in the middle of the most significant identity transformation of your adult life. And you have been trying to navigate it without a map. Let us go deeper into the brain science. Because I think when mothers understand what is actually happening neurologically, something shifts. The experience stops feeling like a personal failing and starts feeling like what it actually is, a biological process of enormous complexity and, in many ways, extraordinary purpose. The gray matter changes we talked about earlier, the selective reduction in specific brain regions, initially alarmed researchers. A reduction in gray matter sounds like a loss. And culturally, we tend to interpret any change in a woman's brain postpartum as a deficit. Baby brain. Mum brain. The apologetic shorthand for a reduced version of a formerly competent self. But the research tells a completely different story. Adolescence also involves significant gray matter reduction, a process called synaptic pruning. The brain eliminates neural connections that are no longer needed and strengthens the ones that are most relevant to the demands of the new developmental stage. It is not loss. It is specialization. The maternal brain appears to do something similar. The regions where gray matter reduces in new mothers are specifically the regions involved in processing the social world in a general, non-specific way. And the regions that show increased activity and connectivity after birth are the regions involved in reading one specific person's emotional states, intentions, and needs with extraordinary precision. Your brain, after becoming a mother, becomes less interested in the social world in general and more exquisitely attuned to one particular human being. This is not an accident. It is not a side effect. It is the brain reorganizing its priorities with ruthless efficiency to serve the demands of keeping a completely dependent human being alive. Neuroscientist Oscar Berrigan at the University of California, Berkeley described the maternal brain as undergoing a pruning process that produces heightened social attunement, a brain that is not less capable but differently capable. More specialized. More finely tuned to the emotional and physical signals of the infant. There is also a significant hormonal component to all of this that is rarely discussed honestly. During pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone rise to levels that are, by any measure, extraordinary, higher than at any other point in a woman's life. And then, in the hours and days after birth, they drop precipitously to levels lower than they were before pregnancy. That hormonal drop is the most dramatic endocrine shift the human body ever experiences outside of certain serious medical conditions. And it happens to every woman who gives birth. Every single one. Whether or not anyone acknowledges it. Whether or not anyone supports her through it. And then, alongside this hormonal earthquake, oxytocin surges, the bonding hormone, the hormone of connection and trust and love, flooding the system and creating the fierce, overwhelming attachment to this new person that most mothers describe as unlike anything they have ever felt. And cortisol rises too. Calibrated by evolution to keep a new mother hypervigilant, alert to threat, tuned to the smallest sound from her infant. A woman in early motherhood is navigating an identity earthquake, a structural brain reorganization, the most dramatic hormonal shift the human body is capable of, a surge of bonding neurochemicals, and a stress response system in a state of permanent low-level activation. All while being asked how she is enjoying every moment. There is a part of matrescence that is the hardest to talk about. The hardest to admit. And the part that, in my view, causes the most unnecessary suffering, because it is the part most shrouded in silence and shame. The grief. Not grief for the baby. Not grief for the relationship or the career or the social life, though those losses are real and worth naming. A more fundamental grief than any of those. The grief for the self that existed before. Most mothers feel it. Most mothers never say it out loud. Because how do you tell someone, how do you tell yourself, that in the midst of the greatest love you have ever experienced, you are also mourning something? That you miss the version of yourself that existed before this love arrived and reorganized everything? It sounds ungrateful. It sounds like you love your baby less than you should. It sounds like the thing you are never supposed to say. But developmental psychologist and matrescence expert Aurelie Athan at Columbia University, who has spent years studying this transition, is clear on this point. The grief is not optional. It is not a sign of ambivalence about motherhood or about the child. It is a structural feature of any significant identity transformation. Every major identity shift involves loss. The teenager grieving their childhood even as they want to leave it behind. The person retiring grieving their professional self even as they welcome the change. The grief and the love exist simultaneously. They are not contradictions. They are companions. And the mothers who suffer most, Athan's research suggests, are not the ones who grieve. They are the ones who are not allowed to grieve. Who have been given no language for the loss. Who interpret their own mourning as evidence of something being wrong with them as a mother. Research from the University of British Columbia found that the expectation that motherhood would feel uniformly joyful, the cultural insistence on the narrative of instant, total, uncomplicated fulfillment, was one of the strongest predictors of postpartum distress. Not the reality of motherhood. The gap between the reality and what women had been led to expect. We set women up to fail their own experience by refusing to give them an honest account of it in advance. The grief is real. The disorientation is real. The sense of loss is real. And it exists right alongside the love, which is also real, also enormous, also unlike anything else. Both things are true. And both things deserve to be said out loud. I want to tell you something about matrescence that the research shows and that almost nobody talks about. It resolves. Not by going back to who you were before, that version of you is gone, and that is not a tragedy even though it sometimes feels like one. But by arriving, gradually and imperfectly and on its own timeline, at something new. A self that integrates the before and the after. A woman who is recognizably herself and also permanently, profoundly expanded by what she has been through. Worley Athan describes this as the matrescing self, a self in active transformation rather than a self that has been lost. The disorientation is not the destination. It is the process. And the research on women who come through this transition with a strong integrated sense of self, who find their way to the other side of the identity earthquake, shows something beautiful. They tend to report a depth of self-knowledge they did not have before. A clarity about what actually matters. A relationship to their own emotions that is more honest and more compassionate than anything they had access to before motherhood demanded it of them. Psychologist Kristen Neff, whose work on self-compassion has transformed how clinicians approach maternal well-being, found that the capacity for self-compassion, for treating oneself with the same warmth and understanding one would offer a good friend, was the single strongest protective factor against the sustained distress of the matrescence transition. Not getting more sleep, though that matters. Not having more support, though that matters too. The relationship a woman had with herself. Whether she could extend to herself the same kindness she was extending to everyone else in her orbit. You are allowed to be in process. You are allowed to not have arrived yet. You are allowed to still be finding out who this new version of you is, what she wants, what she values, what parts of her former self she wants to carry forward and what parts she is ready to leave behind. Matrescence is not a problem to be solved or a phase to be endured. It is an invitation. The most significant and the most demanding invitation most women will ever receive. An invitation to become someone larger than the person you were before. I want to be honest about something before we close. The Western world, by and large, does not support women through matrescence. It does not acknowledge it. It does not name it. It gives women 6 weeks, or 12, or 16, or 26, depending on where they live, and then expects them to reappear, more or less intact, ready to resume. It celebrates the baby and largely ignores the transformation of the woman who just became that baby's mother. Anthropologist Dana Raphael, the woman who gave us the word matrescence in 1973, also coined another term that never made it into mainstream parenting culture. The doula. She used it to describe not a birth professional but something more fundamental, a person whose role is to support and witness the mother through her transformation. Not to help with the baby. To help with the mother. Her research showed that in cultures where new mothers were consistently held, seen, supported, fed, witnessed, given time, the transition into matrescence was significantly less distressing. Not because the transformation was easier, but because the woman was not navigating it alone and invisible. What you need, what every new mother needs and almost none receive in sufficient measure, is not more advice about the baby. It is to be seen. To have someone sit with you in the disorientation and say, I know. This is real. You are not imagining it. You are not failing. You are transforming. And in the absence of a culture that provides that, I want this video to be that, for however long it lasts. You are not lost. You are in the middle of something. And the woman on the other side of it, the one who is being built right now out of everything you are living through, she is going to know things about herself, and about love, and about what it means to be human, that the woman you were before simply could not have accessed. That is not a consolation prize. That is the point. So the next time you are standing at the kitchen sink at 2 a.m. and the question comes, who am I now? I want you to have a different answer than silence. The answer is, you are someone in matrescence. You are in the middle of the most significant transformation of your adult life. Your brain has been structurally reorganized. Your identity is in the process of being rebuilt around a new and enormous reality. Your grief is real and your love is real, and both of those things are true at the same time, and neither of them is wrong. You have not lost yourself. You are becoming someone you have not met yet. And that someone, the woman being forged right now in the fire of sleepless nights and identity earthquakes and love so fierce it frightens you, she is worth waiting for. She is worth every hard moment it takes to get to her. If this video gave you something today, if it named something you have been carrying without language, please share it. Not just with new mothers. With their partners. With their mothers. With anyone who loves a woman who has recently had a baby and does not know how to reach her through the transformation. Because the most powerful thing we can do for new mothers is stop pretending this is simple. And start telling the truth about how extraordinary it actually is. Subscribe to Nurture Nest. Because this is the conversation we are committed to having every single week. The real one. The honest one. The one that sees you. And leave a comment below. Did you know the word matrescence before today? And does having a name for it change anything? I read every single one.